here many as Rotarians and to learn how we can be better people and serve our community. So with that being said, I'm looking and scanning the field and I'm seeing a lot of Rotarians and I'm not seeing any hands up. So it seems like our guests are a little few and far between, and that's okay. That just means it's more for us to enjoy. With that all being said, I'm still scanning the room to see if we have any new guests. We're going to have to bring that back to President John in the introductions. Take it away.
Thank you. I know you mispronounced Jeff, but that's quite all right. Old habits are hard to break. I'm going to take very little time at the podium today because I'm very honored to briefly introduce the leader of today's program, a past president of Seattle 4, a woman who needs really no introduction. She's part of a famously progressive Seattle family. Her grandmother, the original Dorothy Bullitt, brought television to Seattle, created a foundation dedicated for caring for the Northwest environment, and her father was a champion of environmental and human rights causes. And with all of the, shall we say, strange behavior happening in the Beltway, it's a comfort to know that there are strong leaders who have dedicated themselves to trying to do the right thing. And we all, as Rotarians, can count ourselves as part of that group. But with no further ado, I want to turn the podium over to past president and Rotarian Dorothy Bullitt.
Thank you, Jeff. Today's All Rotary program grew out of my experience with aging parents, planning for my own old age, and the opportunity presented by our multi-generational club to dig into the subject, a subject that will touch us all. Past President Don Kraft joined our club when he was in his 20s. He remained active and engaged until his death in his late 90s. Many longtime members joined when we were young, have passed through several stages of life, and some, like Don, will remain connected until our deaths. Some new members will choose to do the same. A benefit of remaining engaged is watching those in the generations before us pass through life stages that we will one day experience ourselves. Today's program is intended to help you consider how to prepare for your own responsibilities as a caregiver and for your own inevitable decline. Today's format will be in two parts. I will begin with the story of my parents' old age, in particular the role I played, and preparations for my own old age. Our panel will be a multi-generational group who are experiencing aging and caregiving from different perspectives. My father, Stim, a man who worked well into his 80s, climbed ever more challenging mountains until Alzheimer's stopped him at 87, and never took a senior discount because he never considered himself old, remarked near the end of his life, "You never know the last time you will walk off a tennis court or leave a dance floor or make love for the last time." My father's health took a steep dip at 86 with lung and prostate cancer, then Alzheimer's. His wife Tina looked after him until the last months when she hired caregivers. He had the very good fortune to die at home at 89. Because of Tina, my role was limited to being his daughter and his friend, visiting weekly but not engaging in any active caregiving. My mother's situation was different. Kay began to experience cognitive decline in her mid-80s and died at 96. I was her primary person. We made sure she drew up power of attorney for medical and financial matters. We went to a mortuary and made arrangements long in advance of her death. We agreed she would stay at home unless she became a danger to herself or others or ran out of money. I agreed to manage her finances and correspondence as she lost the ability to do so. She retained as much independence as possible for as long as possible. My younger sister and I gradually took over the care of her home and property with the help of a growing team. When Kay's cognitive issues made driving a problem, I first convinced her to avoid the freeways, then night driving, than driving except in an emergency. Then I bought her taxi chits. When taxis became too complicated for her to arrange, I hired a driver who doubled as daytime caregiver. Gradually, I hired more than an agency to help. I worked with an elder care expert who was a godsend. I lived close to my mom, so if she fell, I could reach her in minutes. When Kay entered hospice, there was some interfamily conflict, and that was hard. But mother died at home as she'd wished, surrounded by people she loved, singing her the songs she had loved to sing. My responsibilities continued following her death, arranging for the removal of her body, the brain autopsy she requested, her cremation, the distribution of her ashes, the management of her estate, a memorial service, and purchase of a cemetery bench. The home where she had lived for 66 years had to be emptied and the personal property distributed, donated, or dumped. That involved months of constant work. Her estate took 2 years to process, even with help and not much complexity. The memorial service, designed for Kay's big community, took a year to produce. In the end, I knew I had done my duty and honored my mother, who deserved all that and more, but it was a lot. Because I am divorced without children, I long ago realized I better plan for my own old age. So I prepared and regularly revisit my will, with my banker as personal representative and old friends listed to make value decisions without the day-to-day burden of being executors. I executed medical and financial POAs. I purchased first-rate long-term care insurance. When I was temporarily crippled in an accident 24 years ago, I learned the enormous cost of round-the-clock home health care. I also arranged for my cremation and a funeral marker. Though I am in good health and love my home, I know that I will likely need to give up some good days there in order to move into a simpler living situation before it burdens others to move me. So I'm already thinking about where that might be. Aging is a privilege, but it takes planning and work. As our panelists prepare to take the Zoom stage, let me briefly introduce them. Lisa Mayfield, founder of Aging Wisdom and the only daughter of aging parents, will moderate a panel comprised of Rotary's executive director, Mary Goldie, who at 40 faces sole responsibility for her mother, who already requires oversight and care, and Admiral and past President Bill and Carla Center, in their late 70s, will offer insight into their own experience of aging and disability. Please join me in welcoming our panel. Over to you, Lisa.
Thank you, Dorothy. And thank you for sharing your story. I think those of us who have been in Rotary a while remember your days as being such a dedicated caregiver to your mom and how devoted you were. So thank you for sharing that. And thank you for the idea of this program, and to Bill and Carla and Mary for being brave enough to share their personal experiences. As you know, it's always a little nerve-wracking to share in front of such a large group. So thank you all in advance. And we're so glad that you took time out of this snowy day to join us today. I was hoping Mark Wright wasn't going to be here, but I think I saw his name in the chat. So I am not an experienced moderator, so you'll have to be with me while I bumble through. I wanted to start with a few stats just to give us some context to our conversation. And many of them you probably know, but I think it helps to be reminded that more than 10,000 people are turning 65 each day in the United States. So that's 10,000 a day turning 65. 10 years from now, Americans aged 65 and older will outnumber those under 18. And in 25 years, that's 2050, around 45% of the population, the US population, will be older than 65. And people over 65 will outnumber people younger than 15 for the first time in human history. So our population is aging. And I wanted to I thought this was an interesting number too. Estimates put the global market for this age group at a whopping $22 trillion across every industry you can imagine. And also, 70% of people age 65 will need some type of help someday in their life. And so I think this topic and this information is so important because at some point we'll all be there, some sooner rather than later. But so I wanted to start with you, Bill. And my first question is, I'm hoping you can share with all of us a bit about your current experiences at this stage of your life that seem relevant to our aging topic today.
Thanks, Lisa. First, let me acknowledge at least a dozen other wise and helpful members of our club who could be here sharing their own experience. Carla and I will share our story, but every situation is unique. Never hesitate to ask other members of our club for advice. When I joined this club in 1996, I was already in significant pain from an autoimmune disorder and osteoarthritis, controlled by medication, diet, and exercise. When I retired from the Navy 3 years later, I was surprised when the VA classified me as 80% disabled following my discharge physical. In 2007, while serving as president of this club, I had to leave my job as president of the Washington Council on International Trade, primarily because of deteriorating health. 10 years later, after suffering a minor stroke and undergoing brain surgery, I was no longer able to continue teaching part-time at UW and finally had to fully retire at age 71. Stepping backward in the chronology, in 2003, 4 years after I retired from the Navy, we built a large retirement home in Edmonds. We loved that place and thought we'd end up living there a lot longer than 15 years. In 2017, after recognizing we could no longer manage that house, we started looking for a place in Mukilteo suitable for our son, daughter-in-law, and 12-year-old twin grandkids, which could also include an in-law apartment for us. We really hoped we could do that, but a diligent search failed to yield a suitable dwelling. Our realtor then located a nice ground floor condo less than a mile from the kids' home in Mukilteo. We purchased it and I set about remodeling and renovation. A big project. I was still able to do a lot of the work myself. We moved there in 2020 and sold our home in Edmonds. We loved that condo and expected to be there at least 10 years. While I was working on the condo and prepping our Edmonds house for sale, I noticed an accelerated deterioration of my strength, stamina, and chronic pain. The pandemic and a bad fall in January of last year didn't help. I knew, and with our son's urging, Carla finally agreed, it was time to start looking for a senior living community. We visited Mukilteo Senior Living, the closest place to our kids and our condo. There were many things that made the place attractive to us. We gave them a refundable check for $1,000 and put our name on the waiting list, thinking in terms of moving in a year or so. It was the path of least resistance, and I admit I was hoping the kids would stop bugging us. I'm glad they didn't. We finally took our kids for a tour and a meal at Mukilteo Senior Living. They told us the place wasn't nice enough. We gave them some pushback because we were basically satisfied, and we knew expanding our search would be challenging. Visiting these places is hard. With help from our kids and a place for mom, an hour of generous encouragement from Lisa, helping us sort through emotions, priorities, and options, we looked at a few more places. That's the end of this part.
Well, and speaking of Mark Wright, last night, Bill, I was listening to the podcast you did with Mark Wright on his Beats Working last night, and that was about your leadership and the distinct roles you've played throughout your career. And I couldn't help but think, not only have you been a leader in the military for your whole career, but I think you're leading the charge of how to age so successfully, and role modeling. I think acceptance of maybe things the way you don't want them to be, acceptance of a body that might not be cooperating, and making tough decisions kind of proactively, even if your kids are prodding you, but doing so with a smile. and laughter. And I think that's part of the message we want today, is that despite bodies not cooperating or brains not cooperating, you can still have a meaningful, full life. So thank you, Bill, for being such a leader in showing us that. So
Well, you're kind. I would tell you that there are at least a dozen other Rotary members, most of whom are now deceased, who taught me that.
Mhm.
It wasn't something that came organically, and I owe them all a big debt of gratitude. You know, Dorothy mentioned Don Kraft, but there's at least a dozen others that, and so that's why you need to make older friends in Rotary.
well, and I thought what Dorothy said was so helpful about how, for those of us who have been in Rotary a while, we've watched the members we've looked up to kind of grow through different stages and eventually pass away. And I think they have been leaders in aging gracefully. And I will attribute one of my dearest friends in Rotary is Roberta Greer, who's down there, and I can attest to how much I have enjoyed having friends of different generations. So
Absolutely.
shout out to Roberta. For those, it's obvious, but I wanted to do a more formal introduction. Carla is sitting next to Bill, and if you haven't met Carla, she's Bill's spouse and longtime partner. And as he said in this podcast, I mean, he wouldn't have been able to do all that he did when he was out at sea, kind of, not at home for months and months and years, and Carla held the fort down. So Carla, welcome to Rotary, and thank you for being open to sharing with us. And I wondered what you might add, or your perspective of kind of your stage in life and things that Bill might have shared that you've been going through.
Thanks, Lisa. And thanks again for helping us stay calm and focused as we work through the process. When we first started talking about looking for a senior community, I definitely wasn't ready. We finally started looking because our son Steve was so insistent about it. I thought we'd be in the condo for at least 10 years or more. I pictured myself living there for most of the rest of my life if Bill died before I did. My mom, who never learned to drive, lived by herself in her condo in Shoreline until a few weeks before she died at age 92 in 2013. That was a big part of my frame of reference. I was surprised how quickly Bill's physical condition deteriorated after we moved to Mukilteo. Easy tasks became increasingly difficult after the pandemic. In March of 2023, I fell in the condo bathroom. I didn't think it was a bad fall, but a few days later, I developed serious pain in my back. Eventually, the doctors found a compression fracture and recommended a minor surgical repair. I had that done in November of 2023 and did a lot of PT, but haven't experienced any significant major relief. Even with that, I could have stayed in the condo, but I could see that was no longer an option for Bill. Fortunately, we found a place that fit our needs.
Back to you, Lisa.
Thank you for sharing that, Carla. I'm sorry to hear about that chronic pain that is not easy to deal with. And that you got to experience, similar to Dorothy, being a caregiver for your mom. One of the things we forgot to mention earlier is that if we time this right, we're going to have plenty of time for questions. So please be thinking about what you might want to know from our panelists as you think ahead to either caring for parents or your own aging. So shifting gears, Mary Goldie, who we know as our club director, is here today as part of our speakers. And she's here to share a perspective of what it's like to be caring for an aging mother, especially being so young herself. So thank you, Mary, for stepping kind of to this side of Rotary for us. And I'm hoping you can share with all of us kind of your current experience as a caregiver for your mom and what seems helpful for the group to know.
Great. Thank you, Lisa. And thanks for all the other panelists and Dorothy for the idea and getting us all together. This is a pretty brave thing for me to do right now. I'm pretty private. I don't talk about a lot of stuff to others. So I'm pretty much telling people things others have not heard before. So with that, I will carry through. But so my mother indicated to me about it was 2 Christmases ago. I was home for the holidays. She pretty much told me she had dementia, but it wasn't a sit down and, oh honey, I got a diagnosis of dementia. It was just kind of the doctors did some scans. They may think I have early onset dementia, something like that. So it was kind of, vague in terms of like, okay, that wasn't a serious sit down. Does she have it? There are some symptoms, whatnot. So I guess you could say my role as a caregiver started 2 Christmases ago. But honestly, I would say my role as caregiver has spanned my whole life. Being an only child to a mother who struggles with untreated mental health issues means I was an emotional caregiver as a child, trying to understand and ease her paranoia during schizophrenic episodes. As I grew up, I continued to be called upon to help her when concerned friends, family, and doctors would reach out to me. I've been at work before and I've had calls on the intercom that my mother, was calling off the hook trying to get a hold of me, things like that. So throughout my life, I've been called upon to take a caregiving role more than once. So, like taking her to physical evaluations, mental evaluations, that sort of thing. So that being said, my role as a caregiver for someone with mental health issues has actually been harder than being a caregiver for someone with dementia. Because honestly, my mom has kind of shown me a different side of herself through this. I think it's easier to communicate with her now. She's kind of listening more. And I think part of that is because she knows she needs me. I think she realizes deep down inside that there's a need for her to be able to communicate with me in different ways. But the hardest thing is doing all of this 2,000 miles away, not having any immediate family nearby, and also not having a lot of friends or anyone to turn to, or people contacting me about what's going on with mom. So I kind of rely on reports from mom, reports from others, and when they come. So that can make it hard being 2,000 miles away. So I would say my experience so far, I haven't had to do a lot of phone calls, just checking in, kind of trying to arrange things, but it's kind of a wait and see if her condition worsens sort of thing right now.
Thank you for sharing that, Mary. And I think Mary is here because of Dorothy. And I think I've heard people say before, nobody says no to Dorothy. So I know she appreciates you being here too, Mary. So you shared, what's been hard kind of being so far away from your mom, especially being such a long time caregiver, but sort of that role of caregiving shifting slightly differently from mental health support to maybe memory changing support. What has been surprising for you along the way as a caregiver daughter?
Well, I didn't expect to be here at 40. I'll start off with that, especially because the women in my family have a history of living a long time. Like my great grandmother lived to 92, lived independently, full sound mind up to that point. My great aunt lived to 95. She drove to St. Louis once a year in the summer to see baseball up till she was in her mid 80s, I think. So just having this happen at my age and my mom only being 68 is kind of surprising. And I also assumed mom would live independently for a long time as well. Even though her mental health issues have been severe over the years, like sometimes, oftentimes she lives normally for many years at a time. I've never really questioned her ability to live on her own independently. But when she has memory lapses, like forgetting what my name is at times or something like that, I do have these concerns now about her living on her own. She also is a Luddite. She does not have internet at the house. She does not have cable. She does not have a computer. She has a flip phone. So other, ways you can monitor people remotely, I really don't have access to that because she doesn't know how to operate the stuff. She doesn't have internet at her house. So it really is dependent on, what I'm hearing from others and what she's telling me. She quit driving a couple of years ago. She was backing out of a parking space, hit a car next to her. So she walks and takes public transit, which also raises concerns with me being so far away. Because people have contacted me saying, we worry about your mom walking around town all the time. So I actually had a phone conversation with her yesterday and, raised my concerns, and she said she wouldn't do it anymore. But I mean, how am I to tell, if that happens or not? So, there's just lots of, I think, surprised to be doing this at my age, always thinking mom could live independently and maybe questioning that now. And then the opinions of people in my hometown. I think Kentucky and Southerners have this thing where you stay close to family, you stay in Kentucky, you stay nearby. And that was never in the cards for me. Mom never, encouraged like, oh, stay with me, stay home, don't go off to college. She always pushed me to go. So I never felt that pull to stay and take care of her. But it's judgment from others though that do think that way. So I think a lot of the times, because I am an only child, they know I don't have family nearby. It's she should be doing more. She goes and gallivants around the country and lives all over the place. And why isn't she here with mom? And I'm like, mom actively encourages me not to be there. So knowing when I can come, can do, her actively discouraging me not to, it's a lot of conflicting messages. And often the last thing I wanted to say is I often don't know about things that mom has done. Or, if she has any accidents or anything like that until months later. She won't tell me about it. She has not up to this point allowed for me to get access to her medical records. So it's really, unless someone else tells me something's happened or she decides to tell me herself, I don't know that it's happening. So kind of just the lack of communication, knowledge, and information sharing is kind of surprising, I guess, as well.
I think anyone who's battled anything from caregiving to having health issues, that's when all people with all their great opinions and ideas and judgments come out. And I think, it's so hard to not only navigate. I talked to somebody yesterday who just was talking about he wasn't doing a lot for his dad, but just the brain space worrying about his dad takes in his life. And I think that's a kind of toll a lot of people don't talk about. It's just the worry on your brain. And you represent, now that baby boomers are kind of this group that are primarily the ones aging now, Gen X, so I'm a Gen X, are kind of the primary people up to bat soon to be caregivers, but you represent the next generation, the millennials, and they're the group second to Gen Xers who are now starting to be caregivers, and I think more so at a younger age than it's typical for a caregiver when you're just starting your career. Many people have young kids at home, and so all that juggling is a lot, and so you're kind of the figurehead of the millennial generation stepping into this role. So thank you for sharing. And then Bill, I think I'm turning it over to you next to kind of talk about I think the two of you, what have you found most challenging in your current situation and journey? And I think you're on mute. Before you tell us too much wonderful.
I'm sorry. Thank you for correcting me. I just want to agree with you. The younger generations really make a difference. And I want to acknowledge our two sons are both over 50. Just recently, the youngest one just turned 50. And they were really helpful in not only encouraging us to make the move to senior living, but helping us actually do it. And because it was getting beyond our capability. And we're so lucky that both our kids live here in Seattle. And I feel for Mary having to do it from long distance without a lot of support. So that's tough. A place for mom, I talked about that we expanded our search and we had contacted a place for mom, but they actually weren't all that helpful. They assigned us a counselor in Tennessee who had zero knowledge of Puget Sound geography. We told them we wanted to be no more than 20 minutes from our kids in Mukilteo. They recommended places in Bremerton, Silverdale, and Gig Harbor. They did connect us with two places close to home. We visited both and ended up moving to Bonaventure at North Creek in Bothell this past July. One of the things that's challenging about this is the reason that you're having to move is because you're getting decrepit. And being decrepit makes it hard to go around and visit the places. It was hard for us to schedule more than one visit every 2 or 3 days and we didn't look forward to them with great enthusiasm. The most surprising thing to me about this entire process was how rapidly my physical condition deteriorated over the past 5 years. I thought we were ahead of the curve when we purchased the condo. Now I feel like we were 5 years late. Everything takes so much longer than it used to. We're still working on moving everything out of the condo so we can rent it out. And I'm shocked at how difficult that is. And what I'll tell the younger people is, what I mean is, it literally takes first 3 times as long as it used to, then 4 times as long, then 5 times as long, and then you can't hardly do it at all. And it's just staggering how hard things become and the loss of stamina. Finally, the other big surprise is it turns out that I'm quite happy in our new home. I didn't expect to be happy in a retirement facility, and I am. Carla.
Our new apartment is 20 minutes from our condo and family in Mukilteo. It's just a mile from PacMed Clinic, where we get our primary health care. Fred Meyer, Safeway, Dollar Tree, and Walgreens are all located between our apartment and that clinic. We're right next door to the original Pancake House and a good Mexican restaurant. Bill has been there with meeting friends very frequently over the past 6 months.
I go there in my wheelchair.
We have an in-house hair salon along with in-house physical therapy and foot care by nurses, all of which are great conveniences for Bill. We pay $6,560 on a month-to-month basis for a 2-bedroom, 2-bath, 1,000-square-foot apartment with washer and dryer and an extra large balcony. Rent includes 2 meals of our choice each day. We started off eating lunch and dinner daily. Bill gained 30 pounds in the first 3 months and has taken to eating just a single meal, usually dinner, in the dining room. We both like the food a lot better than we expected. Just as an added comment there, the chef here, the current chef, is a man that had 2 Greek restaurants in Everett. And he decided that was way too much work, so he's working here now, and we hope he stays a long time. Rent also includes all utilities, including basic cable, Wi-Fi, and landline phone.
I forgot to mention, it also includes maid service every week, which is great.
We rarely have to hunt for a parking spot, and walking from anywhere in the parking lot to our room is safe and easy, which wasn't the case everywhere we looked. Our apartment was scheduled for complete remodel, which was completed before we moved in. We paid to have waterproof vinyl plank flooring installed everywhere except our carpeted bedroom. We also bought a front-loading washer and dryer and paid to have additional cabinets and closet organizers installed in the closets, bathrooms, and laundry. The upgrades cost us about $15,000. We're happy with the upgrades we made and hope we end up staying in the apartment long enough to get our money's worth.
Back to you, Lisa.
When you were talking about the food, it's very similar to with a freshman 15 when you go to college and gain a bunch of weight. I think it's similar when you move into a retirement community.
Well, it's also like in the Navy, eating is one of your main social activities. And so you enjoy going down to meals and chatting with people down there. And while you're chatting, you just stuff things in your mouth.
Good comparison. And also, when many people are sort of reluctant with the idea of moving to a retirement community, but some of us think about having somebody cook for us, clean for us, do our laundry, plan our social activities, and drive us around. It sounds pretty appealing. And I think you guys did a good job of kind of explaining all the benefits that you found in your new home. Mary, turning it back to you, can you talk a little bit more about what you have found so challenging in your role?
Well, I think I outlined some of that in the last question, not being an only child, not having a network of people nearby that I can rely upon. I have some high school friends that live in Mount Sterling that I've told to, you know, can I have you on call in case I need to get someone to my mom quickly? And they've agreed to that. But there's not the kind of community of eyes on her that I wish she had. When I was growing up, we were members of a Disciples of Christ church in my hometown. And they were kind of a good valve to kind of monitor mom's mental health issues. They were often the ones that would reach out when she would be kind of in crisis. And she got upset at some church members a few years ago and left the church. So that safety net is no longer there. So I don't get as many reports, you know, when people are concerned about her, or they're just not as often, or, you know, I'm kind of not in the know. So that's part of it. Kind of not knowing what to do next has been a challenge, because I'm like, is it a mental health thing? Is it a dementia sign? What is what? And, you know, when is the time that I need to move her up here? Because that is already going through my mind, you know, when is going to be the point that she really can't take care of herself anymore? I cannot stand to have her stay in Kentucky and me be this far away. So it would be, you know, having that conversation with her and moving her up here. So I do have a power of attorney for my mom, but I have struggled to get people to accept it. I've had some professionals here in Washington State look at it. They say it's the shortest power of attorney they've ever seen, the vaguest. They're like, it kind of gives you carte blanche to do whatever, but not really. So it's been tricky trying to enact it. My mom's financial advisor has accepted it. So, you know, if my mom tries to make changes to her investments, anything like that, he will notify me. But that did backfire, because I actually contacted him recently with a question and he told my mom about it. So that was a little tricky. Mom hasn't given me medical permission yet. We were on the phone yesterday and I said, Mom, I don't think you've allowed me to have access to your medical records. I'm a little concerned about that. And she insisted she had, and I, you know, reminded her to maybe take care of it. But I'm actually going to go to Kentucky next month and sit down with the doctor, sit down with the financial advisor, Mom, and make sure everything's straightened out. I think we probably need some tweaking to the power of attorney as well. So I will have to navigate that with my mom next month. So wish me luck. And let's see here. Finding ways to communicate with my mom has been a challenge as well. Without the internet at home, with mom being very independent and evasive about issues, and not having the medical access, I still to this day do not know if she has an official dementia diagnosis, and I won't know that till I go to Kentucky in March. So we shall see. So communication, struggling to enact the power of attorney, you know, differences in Washington law and Kentucky law, and, you know, I guess just thinking everything is okay with the power of attorney is not the way to go. So that's definitely been a challenge for me. Back to you.
I think many of those roadblocks are typical challenges. I've seen many people nodding of similar experiences in their role as caregiver. And now you're going to have this whole club on your side and rooting for you when you have that visit next month. So we'll all be there with you. Bill and Carla, I'm wondering if you can share some advice for this group. And you're on mute. I think you were the one who told us don't go on mute so you don't have to worry about
I
going
know
on.
that, but then Carla and I get chatty. You know, we're all very free with advice. And I did want to say one thing, looking at the questions. If any member ever wanted to come and visit Carla and I just to see what our living situation is like, we love having guests. We can even go to the Mexican restaurant or the pancake house. Anyway, one thing that was really important to us was having rooms large enough and well enough laid out to accommodate our furniture. We visited a couple of places that had much to recommend, but for one reason or another, the rooms simply couldn't accommodate our furniture. Our kids kept saying, no problem, you can get new furniture. I'm glad we didn't do that. That's one of the generational differences too. Baby boomers like us, and we're right on the cusp of the baby boom and the traditional generation. I was born 2 weeks before the start of the baby boom. We tend to hold on to stuff. And the kids in our children's generation, they tend to get rid of things immediately. So, you know, to them, having new furniture would be normal. To us, It really made a huge difference to walk into our apartment, see our own furniture, and feel like we were actually coming home. That's huge. Be prepared for high turnover among the staff at all levels. It's frustrating, but corporate policies are not always well attuned to local and individual location cultures, situations, and unemployment rates. Treat everyone who works in your facility with dignity, respect, and gratitude at all times. They work so hard on our behalf, it's easy to be grateful. Be aware that levels of available support, and this is really important, be aware that levels of available support in assisted living can vary greatly. If you're going to require a great deal of support at some point, don't just assume it will be available when you need it. You need to ask a lot of questions about that. Start looking at places sooner rather than later. Some places may have a waiting list of 3 or 4 years for the most desirable units. They will keep you on the list if your name comes up and you're not ready to move in and or are awaiting a specific unit. Being on the list doesn't lock you into that facility. New places are being built all the time. Keep your eyes open. So, have you got anything to add, Carla?
Yes, one thing we learned quickly was that it is difficult to impossible to learn the cost at a senior living community without meeting in person with a marketing manager and taking a tour. Costs vary widely, but you tend to get what you pay for. Be prepared for annual rent increases. Be sure you fully understand the parking situation if one of you still drives, which I do. You may see plenty of empty, conveniently located spaces when you visit, but most of all, those spaces may be reserved and can only be had for an additional cost. Be sure you know how far you will have to walk from where you will likely park and how safe that walk will be. Parking lots are not always well maintained, and there may be curbs and other trip hazards along your route. Covered parking and garages are also available at some facilities, but they come at a premium and may be tied to specific units. The last item I would like to mention is one of the most important, and that is you need to live with fellow residents you like and can befriend. Try to meet as many current residents as possible every time you visit the facility. Share a meal or two with current residents if possible. It's not hard to learn if these are people you'd like to live with. One of the biggest surprises for me was how easy it was to make new friends and how much I enjoy spending time with them. And there's many extracurricular activities. And I mean, you can I feel like making a commitment to more than 2 at the moment doesn't give me any free time, especially during daylight savings time, to run errands and do reading my book club books and things like that. But we do enjoy playing cards, and we've learned a new game called Hand and Foot, and I have been back playing bridge once a week and after not playing for 35 years. So that makes me happy. Thank you.
If you didn't see, there's a subtext in here, which is listen to your kids. It's not easy to do sometimes, but you should. Anyway, thank you, Lisa. Thanks for your leadership. We love you.
That reminds me, my dad's 81 and he was buying a truck. It was several years back, and he kept going back to the car dealership and back to the car dealership. And they were like, "Oh my gosh, what's taking you so long to make this decision about this truck?" And he said, "You haven't met my daughter. She works in aging. This is probably the last truck I'll ever own." Mary, will you kind of close us out with your advice you might offer to caregivers?
Well, definitely the first one's lean on your community. I don't think I necessarily would have even known where to start or what to do if I wasn't an employee of the Rotary Club and could lean on people like Dorothy and you, Lisa, to give me advice. I think you all have also helped me realize how important it is for me to step up to be a caregiver. I think because of my mom's mental health issues, I for so many years, it was such a burden to me to be interrupted in my life to, check in on her, do things, that I was like, oh, here we go again with another one of these. But I think I owe it to my mother, to do right by her. And I know that, and I always have, but I think I really have an impetus now to do this right. And I want to. I would say Christmas Eve was a really special occasion. I was at the Roanoke Inn on Mercer Island, and Anchor DeWitt Jensen and Einar Handlin come in. And Einar's like, do you want to go see where I live now? So I went and saw his beautiful facility that he lives on Mercer Island. And so, I'm good thing I ran into him. Another piece of advice I would give, you need to be mindful of changes like bank mergers, financial advisors retiring. My mom and I had actually filed her power of attorney at the bank in 2020. This was before her diagnosis and all that. Well, the bank changed hands since then. And, it was the same employee who was there in 2020 when we filed it. She's like, we don't have any record of this. We can't do this. So, that's going to require me on this trip back to Kentucky to go back in with my mom and reset it up. So, keep an eye on bank mergers, retiring financial advisors, etc. And make sure you go with your loved one to these appointments. I can't necessarily rely on my mom saying things that have happened to be true. So, go with them and, come from a place of, I want to make sure this is taken care of before something bad happens. Like on the phone with my mom yesterday, I was, telling her it's because I'm so far away. If I lived closer, I wouldn't be bugging you this much about this stuff, but because I don't, we need to go sort this out together. So if you can find little ways to like reframe some questions or, to take away their anxieties, that helps a lot. I've been keeping a running Google folder of conversations I've had with, attorneys, advisors, the bank. I put the date, I put screenshots and docs. I have like a running doc of pretty much everything for the past 2 years regarding my mom. So, keep a paper trail. And last but not least, give yourself grace. You're not a bad son or daughter because you left home when you were young and moved far away and stayed away. Mom has told me many times that she knew from when I was very little that I wouldn't be staying in Kentucky, and she has never once suggested that I stay closer to home. She has let me live spirited and independently, probably as she would have wanted, and I've let her do so as well all these years. So give yourself grace, everyone.
Love that advice, and I'm sure she's very proud of you and all that you've done way out here away from Kentucky. Before we open it up to questions, we wanted to just kind of share and remind people, and we're singing to the choir about just how to age healthfully and happily. And there's kind of 3 things, and one of them is keep moving. And I think all of you are great examples of that, getting yourself down to our Plymouth church, even when mobility might be harder. The other is keep learning, which is another great plug for Rotary and all that we learn each program. And then the importance of community and socialization. That's the one big thing I think COVID taught us, is how important relationships are and being together. So much so that the Surgeon General made that his focus, is how important it is to connect with others. And so kudos to all of you for being here to learn and to connect, and we'll all age healthfully because of that. So thanks again, Bill and Carla and Dorothy and Mary, for sharing your stories. And I saw lots of questions in the chat. So I think, Jaime, we're turning it over to you.
Yeah, thank you for the explanation and what you all going through, the challenges. And Mary, I just want to say there was a great piece of advice I heard a long time ago. I try to hold to my heart, is don't let other people's perceptions be your reality. You do a lot of great things continuously, and we adore you. So, but let's go to the questions. So James Moore says, Lisa, please talk about hospice. Jimmy Carter was cared for about 2 years, and a close friend of mine had hospice for about 1 year. My previous impression was that hospice was just in the very last stage of life. Educate us more.
Yeah, great question, Jim. Hospice is kind of a term for a kind of a blanket of services that can be provided, and it typically the main focus is comfort care, managing symptoms, keeping people out of pain. Hospice includes, you know, a doctor, a nurse, a social worker, kind of a team of providers, and they can actually provide that team approach wherever you live. So you can have hospice services at home, like Jimmy Carter. You can have hospice services at the retirement community where Bill and Carla are. You can have hospice services in the hospital or in an adult family home. So they can come to you wherever you are. I wish we could do a rebranding of hospice, because most people don't want hospice because they think they're admitting that they're dying, when the main point of hospice is to help you live more comfortably when you're living. Studies have been done that people actually live longer when they're on hospice. So I'm a huge fan and supporter of hospice. By definition, you have to have an illness that will cause death within 6 months. That's kind of the definition. Unfortunately, I think the average person is on hospice like a day or two because people wait so long to get on it. But you can have it kind of indefinitely, like Jimmy Carter did, as long as you continue to meet criteria. It's paid for by Medicare. So some people graduate from hospice because they're doing too well. But that's kind of my long-winded answer about hospice, and hope that helped, Jim. And you
Thank
can
you.
see it kept Carter alive a long time.
Our next question is from past president Jimmy Collins. Would you each please summarize a key point of how you planned your next 5 years while you make competent decisions?
Well, I'll go. We did take care. We got help from Trish Bostrom putting together a will and powers of attorney and powers of medical attorney. All the end of life documents were prepared several years back, and they're in a safe place, and our kids have copies of them. And one thing we learned in the last 5 years is it's nice to make plans, but don't just assume you're going to be able to follow through on them, because aging can catch up on you really quick. But when I was captain of the ship, the crew used to ask me, how come we have to make a plan? We never end up following it. We always change the plan. And my answer always was, well, if you don't have a plan, you don't know what you're changing from. You know, and so the plan provides a good opportunity to look through all the pros and cons and situations and obstacles and everything else. So thinking ahead is good, and you really need to do it as a team, husband and wife, if you're still fortunate enough to have a spouse. I don't want to take up too much time, but I want to add just this one thing. I was away, as Lisa alluded to, a lot of my married life, especially in the first 20 years. And we're actually closer together now than we've ever been. And it's because we need each other more than we ever have. We were both totally independent. You know, we could get by fine without each other. And when we were together, that sometimes actually caused problems, because, you know, each of us wanted to do our own thing and be in charge. And now we can't get dressed without help. And we love each other more than ever. So I don't know if that helps you, Jimmy. We'll be happy to sit down over a cocktail and talk more.
If there's time, I'd like to answer another question.
Go ahead.
That'd be okay. Regarding long-term care insurance, my mother was convinced to purchase long-term care insurance, which required an annual fee of $15,000 that was deducted every year for 20 years. After her death, and after years of caregiving support at home and hospice, I went to the long-term care group, and they did not cover a thing. They made it very, very difficult even to communicate. And in the end, they said nothing that we done had fit their criteria, which they had never provided. They offered to pay for hospice, which was free to us as part of Mother being part of the Kaiser. And so it was basically a waste. I, by contrast, decided when I was young enough to be able and had a sum of money that allowed me to, because I was healthy and younger, a sum of money to buy it up front with 8 years of quality care at the end of life. And then if I don't use it, it will go back to my estate. But because of what happened with my mom, I regularly check in on that, the services provided, the coverage provided, to make sure that they would cover a variety of care. And I've told my close friends who would be these value decision makers for me that if I have to go into assisted living or if I have to have round the clock care at home, to make sure that my long-term care insurance actually covers the kind of care that I received. So I would encourage you to take, if you do sign up for it, that you watch it. And there's a variety of coverage, but it's very expensive to pay out of pocket. But at a certain point, it becomes more cost efficient to simply put money aside for it than to get it.
Thank you for sharing that. And I know we're running close on time. I just want to ask one more question from Heather Fitzpatrick, and we might go a minute or two over because I know past President Jeffrey would like to share some remarks, but I would like to learn this question. Do you have any suggestions for getting someone who's giving you significant pushback to take action on important documents and plans well in advance? Maybe Lisa, you can handle this one.
Stubborn, independent parents. I'm sure nobody has run into those people.
Here.
What I tend to do is talk about future, like, oh, I heard this great program at Rotary and they were talking about how important it is to plan. And I really think we should, I don't know, Heather, which parent, mom, that you want to stay at home. And I think it's really important for all of us to learn, like, what would it take for you to stay at home and really plan for the day that you might need some help. People seem much more open to talking about the future and making it sound very far away. That tends to be pretty helpful, but I'm certainly happy to chat about that more. I know a thing or two about stubborn, independent parents, people.
Well, that's everything here. I want to say it was really engaging chat to see so much reminding each other and how much we all belong. Like Mark Wright said, thank you for the panel, everything you discussed. It was awesome. And past President Jeffrey, future governor, district governor, please take it away.
This bill, I just want to ask a quick question.
I'm sorry.
Can we hang around on the Zoom after the meeting in case anybody wants to ask more questions?
Mary says yes. And so do hang around. And again, Bill and Carla, Dorothy, Lisa, Mary, thank you all for sharing what can be difficult conversations. I also want to quickly thank REB Enterprises and Carl Banke as our gold sponsor, and also Bloodworks Northwest. So again, they're running short. It's a great time to consider donating if you're willing and able to do so. And then just very lastly, a thread that continued throughout the conversation during the chat also touched on the fact that as we all age, we really need to bring in that next generation of Rotarians to continue the vitality of the club and Rotary in general. And I just want to briefly remind everyone of one of the great programs that the district does provide for, and that's the RISE program. We should definitely get a couple of folks involved in the next cohorts. There's going to be one starting in the spring, April. It's focused on the north, but Seattle can certainly participate. That's happening again, April in the spring session. And then there'll be cohort 5, which is happening in the fall, which will focus on the east side. But either of those would be great to get any Rotarian who's a member of Seattle 4 who wants to polish their leadership skills to participate. And with that, I think we're just a bit over time, but I want to thank everyone again for their active participation in this week's meeting. And I'll close with the thought from the classical black and white Westerns that Bill used to watch when he was a kid. The classic line is that one cowboy looks at the other and says, "None of us are getting out of here alive." We are adjourned.